I'm Robin from CookingMexicanRecipes.com. Now today I am making a homemade apple pie. Now it's getting close to the holidays, and so I thought this would be a great time to show you how to do this. Now a lot of people get intimidated by making a homemade pie crust, and I want to assure you today that it's really not that difficult. I'm going to show you some tips and techniques, and hopefully that will make it really easy for you and you can do this at home. Before we start our recipe, I want to go over with you some of the equipment that you got to make sure you have. So to start with, we're going to need a couple of bowls, which I have right here. And I've got a cookie sheet covered in foil. This will be, I'll explain that later, but basically it's to catch the drips when we're baking. You're going to need a sifter. So I got one here. And you're going to need this item here, which is a pastry blender if you're not familiar with this. We're going to use this to cut in our shortening into the flour. You got to have that. You're going to need a rolling pin, and this one has, it rolls independently of the handles. Some of them are attached in one piece, but this makes it a lot easier. And my recipe calls for a 9-inch pie plate, so make sure you use a 9-inch. If you try and squeeze a 10-inch into this, it's not going to work. You're going to be really frustrated with a 10-inch because the pie crust just won't fit. Now, here's an item that I highly, highly recommend that you get. If you're not familiar with this, this is a pastry cloth. And so you can see mine has a nice stain right in the middle because I've made pies over the years with it. And this really makes pie making or crust making so much easier. It allows you to move your pie crust from the surface and get it into your plate without sticking. So we'll go over that a little later, but this is definitely a must-have. And let's see, we're also going to need something to cut the apples with. Now you can use your traditional knife and a cutting board, and that works great. But I also have this item here. This is a apple core peeler, and it makes really short work of peeling, say, 10 to 12 apples. And it's kind of fun to use. So it does everything for you, pretty much. And I'm going to demonstrate this, and after you see it, you may want to get one yourself. So now I want to go over the apples. The apples are really important for your apple pie. I like to use, my favorite apple is the Pippin apple, and it has a very short season during the year, which is about mid-November, and I can get it all the way through probably January. But today I'm using a Granny Smith, and it works perfectly well too. It's a good apple for pies, so when you can't find the Pippin, I go to the Granny Smith. So the first thing we want to do when starting our apple pie recipe is to start peeling and coring our apples and get them cooking, because it takes a certain amount of time to peel these apples, cook them on the stove, and let it cool for 10 or 15 minutes before we can even add it to our pie crust. So let's get started. I want to show you my little machine here, the apple peeler core. This unit attaches to the surface with a suction cup that we have here. All right. Now there's a lever here, and this handle I'm going to pull back like that. And then you take your apple and you push the apple into the core like that. And then basically you just crank it, and it comes over to this cutting area and will peel the apple for me. Now as you can see, it's taking off the skin, and it's going to take out the center as well. And what you have left is basically this spiral of an apple. Now, even though it's done all that, you have to go back and check to make sure that you don't have any part of the core in there, because that really isn't very good in an apple pie. And so it does take a little time to do that, because I like to make sure that I get that out. I really don't like to take a bite of that hard part. So obviously everybody doesn't have one of these, but they really work great. Now I'm going to show you how I do it by hand, just so you know. You cut your apple in half, and then I just cut it into quarters. And then I take a small paring knife, and I cut out the inside, get the seed out. I'm just going to peel the apple. Now you can peel it first if you want. I just decide to go ahead and cut it into quarters and then peel it. Doesn't really matter. So you can do it by hand, and then you just come over to your pot and you make slices that are relatively thin, about a quarter of an inch thick. But you can see how much quicker the apple peeler core works, and so that's why I do like to use it. So I've got all my apples peeled and cored and in the pot. And by the way, I used 11. Now you could go probably maybe one more. That would be just about the right amount, but it's good where it's at. Now, what I'm going to do now is I've got a cup of sugar. Now, I also tasted one apple slice just to see now how tart is it. I put anywhere between 3/4 of a cup to 1 cup of sugar in my apples. And so this one, because it's a little bit tart, I went ahead and went with 1 cup of sugar because it needs it. And so I'm going to add 2.5 teaspoons of ground cinnamon to my sugar. And I've got 1.5 tablespoons of cornstarch. Now, what's going to happen here is the sugar is going to make a lot of juice. And the cornstarch is going to be a thickener for that sugar so that it's not real runny, but not too thick either. I don't like it personally where it's really, really thick, so you can adjust that to how you like it. So you want to combine all of this nicely so that it's going to be evenly distributed throughout the apples. So just about got that mixed up nicely, and then I'm going to sprinkle it all over. Now, have you ever seen an apple pie where you cut into it and you've got this big gap between the top layer of crust and the apples? Well, the way to avoid that is to cook your apples ahead of time, and that's what we're doing here. I always cook my apples, they shrink down, and then when I add them to my pie crust and I put my top layer on, they're touching each other so that when it cooks, you never have that gap. All right, so now I'm going to put these on the stove, nice and low, and they're going to cook for about 20-25 minutes. And then they'll be ready. We'll let them cool, and then we'll work on our pie crust. The apples have been cooking now for 15 minutes, and we're going to take a peek and see how they look. I can't tell you how good it smells in here. Now have a look at this. You can see the juice in here I was telling you about. The sugar made all that juice, and the cornstarch has thickened it up just enough. This is how I like it. It's thick, but it's not real thick, and it still has some nice movement to it. Now the apples have cooked down pretty good. They're soft, but they're not mushy or anything like that. So I'm gonna let them go 5 more minutes, and then we're gonna turn it off to cool. So while I'm waiting for the apples to cook up their last 5 minutes or so, I wanna go over the preparation for our crust, the scary part. Okay, now we're gonna need 2 1/4 cups of white flour, and it's gonna be double sifted. We're gonna have 1 teaspoon of salt, and I'm gonna have 2/3 of a cup of some chilled shortening. Now I went to the store today and I bought me a fresh package. I suggest you do the same when you're making your pies because that's going to make it the best crust. So I took that cube and I stuck it in the refrigerator so it's getting chilled until we're ready to use it. The other thing we're going to need is some ice water because I'm going to add some ice water to the flour mixture to make the dough. I'm going to put a couple of cubes of ice in here, and I'm going to put the cold water, some cold water in here. I'm going to use about 6 to 8 tablespoons total, and I'm going to keep that in the fridge until I'm ready to use it. Okay, I turned off the apples that were cooking, and I took the lid off, and now they're just sitting on the stove, cooling off. Now I'm going to start the pie crust. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to work on sifting our flour 2 times. All right, so I got a piece of wax paper. I like to use wax paper because I'm kind of messy, and it works really well for me. So I'm going to just fill up my sifter, and then what we want to do is I'm just going to put my 1 cup measurement and sift right into it. So the reason we want to sift our flour twice is so that it's light and has a lot of air in it. We want it to be light and fluffy so that the crust will be light and flaky. So I'm going to handle this very gently. I have a smaller bowl here, and I'm going to pour this in very gently into my bowl. I don't want to bang it around and pack it down. Okay, so now I'm going to sift another cup because I need 2 1/4. All right, and I'm going to set this one in there gently. Okay, and gently into the bowl. So now I'm going to add the teaspoon of salt to the flour that's been sifted once. And I'm going to add this flour to the sifter again, gently, because I don't want to lose any of that volume that I got with the air sifting it the first time. And then I'm going to sift it all, and the salt will be mixed in there as well. I've taken my shortening out of the refrigerator. It's been chilled, and I'm going to measure out 2/3 of a cup, pack this down into the into the measuring cup so there's no air bubbles and we got the full amount in there. Just going to set it in there. Just like that. Okay, so I got my second third of the cup in there. I'm going to set that in there. All right, so now we're going to take our pastry blender, this tool here, and we're going to cut in the shortening into the flour. So you just kind of do this chopping motion. And I use my finger to kind of wipe this down a little bit so that the shortening falls back into the bowl. And I just keep doing this, and we're going to continue to do this until it looks like, almost like little peas. And it really is getting mixed in now, just about ready. It's evenly incorporated in all the flour. I think that's pretty good. We'll stop with that. So remember that ice water I put in the refrigerator? Well, now we're going to use it. So we're going to stick it into I'm going to put 3 tablespoons at a time into the mixture here and stir it up with a fork. This is nice cold water, which will help keep that shortening from melting. So we just kind of stir it up. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to keep stirring it up and adding a little bit of water until we get a nice ball of dough. So we can see here that it's starting to get sticky and clumping together nicely. I'm going to add just a little bit more water, not too much, just a little bit, because I don't want it to get too sticky. I think I'm about ready. I can form this into a ball, and I'll do that with my hands. So here we go. I'm kind of pushing it together. Like I said, I don't want to play with it too much, but I just want to get it into a nice ball like this. Okay, so I've got my dough into a ball, and I'm going to cut it in half. Sometimes I make one side slightly bigger than the other side, but it's pretty much right in the middle. A larger piece, which is this one here, and I'm going to use this for my top piece. And I'm going to stick it in the bowl. Okay, so I've dampened these paper towels, and what I'm going to do is going to cover the dough, this half piece, just to keep it moist so that it doesn't dry out while I'm working with the other half. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of flour on top, just to help keep it from sticking. Kind of rub it around a little bit. I'm going to make a circle, make a good circle out of it, and put it in the middle, and I'm going to pat it down. And I'm going to try and keep the circle shape as best that I can. So what I'm doing here is I'm pushing down with these fingers, and I'm keeping the shape with the other hand, and making a circle like that. We want to take some flour and just rub it over the roller like this. And now when you're rolling the dough, you want to start from the middle and work your way out. And as you go out, you want to come up so that you don't have a pinched edge. Okay, so we're going to go like this. And you're going to rotate every time you make a swipe across. Okay, so I went around it once. Now I'm going to come back and do the same thing I did before with my hand, because the edges tend to want to break up a little bit. Okay, so I'm just going to keep this procedure until I get this dough big enough to go in my 9-inch pie plate. Now this looks like this will work. You can see we've got about 1 inch all the way around. So we're going to go with that. Here's the beauty of the pastry cloth. I'm going to fold it over and peel it back slowly, because sometimes it does stick. Okay, so see how nice that was? All right, now I'm going to fold over the other half and do the same thing and peel it back. Here it's stuck a little, so I'm going to use my hand to just kind of push it down. Now I'm going to pick it up and lay it into the pie plate halfway. Okay, so here we go. We're going to gently lay it in. We don't want to stretch it. So now I got half of it in. Now I'm going to peel it back over and ease it into the pie plate gently. So I'm kind of just pressing it down, letting it fall to the bottom, and trying not to stretch it out. So now I'm ready to pour the apples into the pie crust. They've cooled off pretty good. Pour this in. Look at that juice. Wow. That's going to be one good pie. Now when you put this in, I always like to mound it just a little bit in the middle, and then kind of let it be kind of slope down on the sides. That smells incredible. Now we want to dot it with some butter. Dotting it with butter means just putting little pieces of butter. start to melt all over the pie. You know, you're put probably a tablespoon of butter on here. Just dot it all the way around. Really adds some nice flavor to the apples. Okay, so now we're ready to do our top crust. Now, because I have a little sticky part right here on my pastry cloth, I'm just going to flip it over and use the other side so that I won't have too much of a problem with it sticking. All right, the top crust is rolled out. I'm going to show you how we're going to do this one. Get it kind of close. We're going to fold it over again in half and peel it off slowly so that in case it does stick, it doesn't put a hole in it. We're going to do it again the other way. Now this time, what we're going to do is we're going to make some slits because the pie needs to have some air holes from the steam. So I'm going to do like 3 slits. Not too close to this edge though, because that's where we're going to be folding it under. Okay, so now I'm going to pick this up. And actually, I'm going to open this up. And I'm going to set it halfway on the pie. Okay, and then I'm going to bring this back over gently. Remember, we don't want to stretch. We don't want to stretch it. I just want to kind of shift it over just a little bit. Now you can see it's overhanging quite a bit. We're going to trim some of that up. Okay, so I'm just going to tear, because otherwise if you don't take some of this excess off on this one side, it's going to be really, really thick. So what we want to do is we want to take the top crust and roll it underneath the bottom crust to give it a seal. Can you see that? So again, we're taking the top crust, here it is, here's the bottom crust. So we're going to roll it under like that, and it seals it up. I'm going to go around the whole edge and do that same thing. And if we have too much, like here it's a little bit thick, I'm going to tear it off. And then I'm going to go right around, tuck it under. And this will help keep it from spilling over when it's cooking too. Okay, so now we're going to put our decorative edge on our pie crust. So you take your finger and your thumb and your other finger from your other hand and just squeeze and push. You see how we go around, just squeezing and pushing, and it goes very quickly. So you'll have this done in no time, and it makes a very nice decorative edge. All right, so now what I want to do is I've cut off 3 pieces of aluminum foil, because it takes 3 to make it around the pie. And I'm just going to place it around the pie. This keeps it from burning. I'm going to put this on for the first 30 minutes. And sometimes it's kind of tough. I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to grab my cookie sheet that's covered with foil just to make cleanup easier, and I'm going to set the pie on it like that. And then I'm going to continue putting this around. You just want to get it to the edge, you know, the fluted area where I made the decoration. I'm going to cook the pie in a 425-degree oven, and I'm going to set the timer for 30 minutes. So after 30 minutes are up, I'm going to take the foil off of the edges of the pie, and I'm going to put it back in for another 20. So it's going to cook a total of 50 minutes. Okay, let's cook this baby. Okay, so our pie has been cooking in the oven for 50 minutes, and I want to show you how nice it looks. So you can see how nicely everything browned up fairly evenly by covering that edge with foil. It's all pretty even, it's nice golden brown, it's just the way we want it. So here you can see that the crust turned out nice and flaky. You can see that here. And with the cut piece, remember we talked about how sometimes you have pies where there's a big gap of air between the top crust and the top of the apples, and you don't have that issue when you cook your apples ahead of time like I mentioned earlier. So I hope this encourages you to try making your own homemade pie at home, maybe for Thanksgiving or Christmas. It's really not that tough, as you've seen demonstrated here, so give it a try. And if you want the full recipe with all the details, check out my website at cookingmexicanrecipes.com. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.